An architectural wonder on the Hudson becomes a victim to the very thing it stored.
When he first started building it, it was basically a solution to a storage need. But along the way, he caught the bug to make it more.
A majestic summer home of an eccentric mistress transforms into a staircase leading nowhere.
Like any ruins, the site asks the question, who lived here? What did they do here? What is their legacy?
And a bustling mill town now left with a population of 0.
People often ask, how did this happen? Everybody is looking to bring Johnsonville back to its grandeur.
Scattered across the country are remnants from the past that are fading from view. Each place has a story to tell and a secret to reveal. Join us on a journey as we explore these incredible sites and uncover a forgotten history. I'm Nick Apostilides, and this is American Ruins. Polypel Island, New York. Located just 60 miles north of New York City, this small 6.5-acre island in the middle of the Hudson is home to a host of mysterious legends dating back to Native Americans who believed the island was haunted. But among this place of myth and legend lies the remains of a crumbling castle and the story of a man who built an arms empire.
Frank Bannerman's story is fascinating to me. Starts as a very humble, rags to riches kind of guy. He basically is considered the father of the Army-Navy store.
So how did this once thriving business turn into rubble? The story begins in 1854, when a young Francis Bannerman and his family immigrate from Scotland to the United States, setting up shop in Brooklyn, New York. In 1861, the American Civil War had just begun, and Bannerman's father enlists in the Union Army, forcing Francis to quit school and learn the family business.
Young Francis becomes the family breadwinner. He's taught to go to naval auctions to purchase surplus goods that he can resell for profit. And fairly quickly, he realizes how to function as a businessman and an entrepreneur.
Pretty soon, the scrappy young Scot had amassed a vast inventory of surplus goods. And by the time his father returns from the war, Francis has a large enough stockpile to start his own company. In 1872, he opens his first store at 43 Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, and as the business continues to grow, Bannerman opens several new stores to meet the growing demand.
So he had actually a number of stores over the years, but the most famous is 501 Broadway.
Taking up nearly an entire city block, the over 40,000 square foot space was filled to the brim, serving as both a store and museum that contained one of the most comprehensive collections of war relics in the world. In fact, the company's stockpile became so vast that he would create one of the most extensive catalogs of historical weaponry. Over the course of 30 years, Bannerman had developed an extremely successful business, but in 1898, he would make a purchase that would change everything. It's the end of the Spanish-American War, and Bannerman gets his hands on an explosive inventory, a staggering 90% of all of the US's captured military goods, and among it is a large supply of black powder. Though highly profitable, it also presented him with a major problem.
Locals in Brooklyn, where he had his warehouse at the time, were concerned about that being stored near their homes and businesses.
He would now have to move the powder outside the city limits, and that's when Bannerman sets out on his search and finds a small rocky island located in the middle of the Hudson. But that was no ordinary island. What Bannerman found was a place of pure legend. Before Henry Hudson explored the area in 1609, it's said that Native American tribes believed the island was haunted, and as Dutch exploration expanded, new superstitions of ghosts and goblins that inhabited the area emerged. Goblins or not, the waters around Polypel are indeed treacherous. Nevertheless, Bannerman was convinced it was the perfect spot to store his valuable goods.
The island is 2 rock humps. It's bedrock. So if you think about it, a guy who's looking to store black powder isn't going to have a problem.
Bannerman makes inquiries and finds out that the island is owned by Mary Taft of Cornwall.
Frank Bannerman approaches Mary Taft to purchase the island. She stipulates that alcohol not be manufactured, stored, or sold from the island.
Bannerman agreed, and on December 5th, 1900, he purchases the island from Mary Taft for $600 cash and a $1,000 mortgage. He begins construction right away on a 3-story arsenal, a small dock, and worker housing. And that's when he comes up with another ingenious plan. Bannerman decides to turn his warehouse into a giant advertisement and boldly displays the name of his company across the side of the building, providing it with some extra publicity. Bannerman's efforts definitely paid off, and by 1905, he had enough stock to outfit an entire army. But with this came the need to expand his storage facilities and create a harbor for ships entering the island.
He buys in 04 from the state 6.5 acres of underwater rights. The state stipulates he mark his property line, and he builds the harbor and breakwater by sinking old wooden railway barges filled with rock.
Bannerman then draws up the plans for the second and third arsenals, but this time he places a stronger emphasis on design.
When he first started building it, it was basically a solution to a storage need. But along the way, he caught the bug to make it more. In 1905, when he does the first expansion and he starts building aesthetically with some of the castle-like qualities, I think there was an awareness that by building this marvelous structure, he directed people to his business.
Then in 1908, he sets his sights on another ambitious project, the construction of a family residence in the iconic castle-like tower that would help put Polypel on the map.
In 09, he builds the tower, and the tower to me is the main event. There's all kinds of things from half-ball finials, full-ball finials, corbelling, crenellation. It is a wonderful piece of architectural mixtures.
But for Masons, turning Bannerman's towering plans for a Scottish castle into a reality was no small feat.
He draws these things on the back of envelopes, on the back of correspondences, and it's extraordinary to look at what these guys took as very rudimentary drawings. There aren't engineered drawings for these.
The end result was an architectural marvel that would help cement Bannerman's place in history. By 1915, construction was nearly complete. Meanwhile, World War I had just begun. Being in the global munitions business, Bannerman supplies were in heavy demand.
Frank Bannerman was a very patriotic man. When we entered into World War I, he was very philanthropic. He outfitted an entire Scottish regiment, but he also sent an entire barge load with uniforms, crutches, and other material to the Belgian War Relief, and he did it all at his own expense.
With Bannerman supplies now shipping all over the world, the US government was beginning to grow suspicious. And so the US Navy Intelligence Bureau began an investigation, sending Navy personnel to monitor activity on the island. For 2 months they occupied Polypel and combed through the island's arsenals, searching for evidence.
What the naval personnel discovered was Charlie Kovacs. He was the island's superintendent, and he was Austrian. This created a whole controversy that maybe Frank Bannerman was some kind of a traitor, which was absolutely absurd.
Charles was arrested on April 19, 1918, and faced deportation. But with very little evidence found to support their case, he was released on parole. Bannerman was outraged by this turn of events, and a letter was penned to FDR, acting Secretary of the Navy. Although he would later be exonerated from these allegations, the damage had already been done. Soon after the investigation, Bannerman's health rapidly declined, and on November 26, 1918, before construction on the island had been completed, he passed away. The project he had spent nearly 2 decades building, he would never see completed. Polypel and the Bannerman's global company was turned over to his sons, Frank and David, who continued using the island for storage. Construction was finally complete, but less than 2 years after Bannerman's death, there was about to be another blow to the business. On the night of August 15, 1920, the powder house explodes, sending debris as far as 20 miles away.
Blew out windows throughout the structures. Not all of the windows were quickly replaced. The elements got in and started some of the rot.
The arsenal was destroyed, and Bannerman's business would never be the same. His sons focused on selling off existing stock rather than purchasing new goods. By the 1950s, his sons had both retired, and the extravagant castle complex was beginning to crumble.
In 1959, the roof of the tower collapsed onto the floor below. By 1965, there was unwarranted stock, and the structure was really starting to deteriorate.
The family abandons the property, and the island is largely forgotten. Then in August of 1969, a major fire breaks out on the island.
Flames were rising 50, 60, 70 feet in the air. It lit up the night sky, and it burned for 3 days. There really was nothing that anybody could have done to fight this fire. And what the authorities did is they came on the island, and then they stood back and let it burn.
With most of the structures reduced down to shells of concrete and brick, plans for the island became uncertain. Then, in 1993, the Bannerman Trust formed and has since helped bring tourism back to the island and help preserve its history. Even today, The legacy of Bannerman and his global munitions empire still stands within the remains of his iconic castle.
He really comes up with his version of a castle in his own creative way that really is one of the most extraordinary self-portraits of a man that I can think of.
Hidden deep within the woods in the New Hampshire town of Chesterfield lies the foundation of an imposing stone chateau that was once a summer destination for New York City socialites. Now all that remains is a staircase leading nowhere and the story of its mysterious mistress.
When I first came to the site, I quickly began to want to investigate what's the story? What was this place all about? Who is Madame Cherie?
Madame Antoinette Cherie was born in France in 1878. And from the very beginning, her welcoming into this world was a story larger than life. Legend has it that a mysterious corkscrew of lights danced over the Paris skyline for several nights following her birth, a story she welcomed with open arms. She was brought up on the stage, and by her late 20s, Cherie had become a reputable theatrical singer and dancer. Then, while performing one evening, Cherie captured the attention of a young man, Anthony Macaluso.
Anthony Macaluso was an American expatriate in France who was using the pseudonym Andre Riella. He has links to organized crime, to bootleggers, allegedly to Al Capone, and that's who Madame Cherie married.
Cherie and Riella immediately hit it off, but by 1911, the couple was finished with the Paris scene and set their sights on the bright lights of Broadway. They'd set up a small theatrical costume shop, which quickly blossomed into a thriving vaudeville business that produced one outlandish outfit after the next.
She had a protege, Charles Lemaire, who won Oscar awards for his work with 20th Century Fox, and he learned costuming from her.
Business was booming, and Cherie was at the center of it all. Her name became synonymous with the New York City party scene, as the two circulated around town as part of the inner Broadway circle. But the good times could only last so long.
It's the 1920s. Fast times, bathtub gin, liquor. He ends up in a New York sanitarium and dies at the age of 27.
Madame Cherie was devastated. The bright lights of Broadway had lost their luster, a painful reminder of her late husband Andre. And so when her close friend and actor Jack Henderson invites her to stay at his home in Chesterfield, New Hampshire, she knew she had found her refuge.
She falls in love with this quiet setting. She came here to write the next act of her life story, and it involved buying a farm and building a castle.
In 1929, just after the stock market crashed, Cherie purchases 600 acres of land and began designing an elaborate summer home. With financial backing from her protege, Charles Lemaire, construction began, but she baffled workers who were never handed any blueprints. Instead, she simply put sticks in the ground to mark the foundation. She was said to be demanding, often telling workers how to do their jobs. But when construction was complete in 1931, what rose from the forest floor was a sight to behold.
She would meet her guests at the train station in Brattleboro, and they would ride here in a chauffeured, cream-colored Packard touring car. When they would disembark, they would approach this site to this imposing facade. You would have seen this Roman arch staircase, the Primrose Path, some people called it, a third floor of bedrooms and balcony, maple trees growing up through the interior of the house, lavish furnishings, oriental rugs, ornate, heavy wooden furniture. The house was architecturally anomalous to Chesterfield, New Hampshire.
Madame Cherie finally had her own elaborate stage that was ready for opening night. She hosted extravagant and raucous parties, often lasting all day and going late into the night. She had numerous young male and female acquaintances and constantly chain-smoked, claiming to light only one match a day. It was as if the Roaring Twenties had never ended, but it didn't take long for unseemly rumors to start spreading around town. Some say she would drive her Packard car around town wearing only her fur coat with nothing on underneath. Whispers that her chateau was actually a brothel, and that Madame Cherie was a real-life madam began to surface. And some even claimed that the hideaway was a safe house for New York City mobsters.
The rumors grew, and she didn't do anything to dissuade them. Who is this woman? This beautiful woman, this Madame Antoinette Cherie? Where is she from? Who are these young men? She loved the reputation.
Cherie remained an enigma to the community and continued her ways throughout the Great Depression. But by the end of the Second World War, the parties died down, and Charles Lemaire stopped sending checks. Penniless and alone, Cherie quickly tried to change her fortune. Her bid to turn the chateau into a nightclub failed, and since she hadn't worked in over 20 years, she was ineligible for Social Security benefits. The eccentric woman who was once so full of life was now nearly destitute.
There's a sadness about this site, her life, and the decline of her fortunes. She did not want people to know what became of her. When people figured out the connection and asked her if she could ask her wealthy New York acquaintances to help support her, she said they must never know what happened to Madame Cherie.
Cherie still clung to the hope that one day her chateau would return to its former glory, but her story would soon take another tragic turn.
The house was vandalized in October of 1959. Somebody had come through and slashed tapestries, smashed the grand piano, basically ransacked the house. She walked through the rooms sobbing. She was devastated. She never came back to this place.
And in 1962, her home was engulfed in flames and burnt to the ground. The foundation and the stone staircase was all that remained. When a local man reached out to inform Cherie about what happened to the chateau, she simply asked, what did they say about Madame Cherie? Her protege, Lemaire, foreclosed on the property, and the infamous Packard, the only remaining asset Cherie had, was sold to an Ohio collector in 1963, with the proceeds only making a small dent in the debts that she owed. But on September 10th, 1965, an artist from Vermont named Ann Stokes bought the property from Lemaire, with hopes of turning the land into an artist community.
A month after Ann Stokes purchased the property, she called on Madame Cherie in Brattleboro to tell her about her vision for the future of the property, and all Madame Cherie could say is, just tell me something to make me happy.
6 weeks later, Madame Antoinette Cherie passed away at the age of 87, and the truth behind the rumors of her lavish life would forever remain a mystery.
In many ways, her legacy, her story is bigger than life itself. Charles Lemaire said she was different to everyone who knew her.
For the next 40 years, Stokes kept the tradition of Cherie alive by holding performances, concerts, and parties within the ruins of the chateau. And in 1991, she turned the land over to the New Hampshire Forest Society, who still protects the site to this day.
Ultimately, Madame Cherie's chateau was essentially the stage set for a production in which she was the star. Her theatrical legacy lives on in the rubble of a place whose vision was never fully realized in her lifetime.
Within the beautiful countryside town of East Haddam, Connecticut, lies the remnants of a once thriving mill community and Victorian-era tourist attraction. But now its visitors have all but vanished, and its population has been reduced to zero. This is Johnsonville. So what caused everyone to abandon this once flourishing village? The story starts during the American Industrial Revolution, when small mill towns started sprouting up along rivers throughout New England. A man named Stanton Card, a pioneer of manufacturing interests in Connecticut, took note and saw an opportunity near a small cove off the Salmon River. In 1832, he constructs one of the first cotton twine mills in the area, but the mill wouldn't start to take shape until Emery Johnson came into the picture. Johnson married Card's daughter in 1838, and after saving up a few $100s, he strikes up a partnership with Card for a stake in the mill. Johnson, by all accounts, was hardworking and as honest as they come, and he builds a home across the street to oversee the work of the factory.
During its time, it was one of the most prestigious and spectacular homes in the area. At one point had sprawling gardens off the back. It's kind of one of those interesting pieces where you can walk into it and there's still the indoor outhouses off the back.
He even offered use of the house to the community for acts of benevolence.
This was a mill town, so when somebody would pass, they would actually do the viewings in the front parlor of the house.
For the next 20 years, Johnson and Card put the mill town on the map as the twine capital of America. And after Card passed away in 1867, Johnson inherited the company, calling it the Neptune Cord and Twine Mills. He remodels Card's original mill, builds a post office, and names the area Johnsonville. Business went well for a time, and generations of Johnsons would walk the streets of the village. But after World War II, And with the advent of synthetic materials like nylon,
This is a synthetic fiber.
You mean we make cloth out of that?
the golden age of twine was reaching the end of its rope. Then in 1965, aerospace gasket manufacturer and self-made millionaire Raymond Schmidt purchases the entire village of Johnsonville, mills and all.
Ray Schmidt really had a dream, and his dream was to recreate this Victorian-era town.
Schmidt had grand visions to breathe new life into Johnsonville. With the still functioning Neptune Mills as his centerpiece, he planned to surround them with Victorian-era houses and make the village an historic tourist attraction.
He found buildings that were up for sale or that he liked, and then he proceeded to disassemble each building and reassemble them on the grounds.
Stables, a chapel, a general store, and a schoolhouse, all plucked from various corners of New England and moved to Johnsonville. Brick by brick, each building was taken down, numbered, and rebuilt on the site with incredible precision.
There was a defunct amusement park in New York City called Freedom Land, and all the rides were going up for auction. Well, he had the opportunity to buy this steamboat, so he purchased it, and then his next issue was how do you get it to Johnsonville?
Schmidt's eccentric dream was starting to take shape, but it wouldn't take long for that dream to unravel. In 1972, the flagship Neptune Mill was struck by lightning and burnt to the ground. And just like that, the lifeblood of the town was gone. Johnsonville was never the same. Schmidt would occasionally open up the property for weddings and other events, doing anything he could to rekindle interest in the village.
During the holidays, Johnsonville would get decorated, but they took it to the next step, and they actually put mannequins in the windows of some of the buildings that weren't occupied.
Schmidt's plans for revitalization were forever dashed. And in 1994, after a spat with East Haddam officials over zoning issues, Schmidt stated, "I'm bailing out. I have to fight them all the way. I devoted all these years to making the place a showplace." Schmidt was frustrated. He canceled all events, including weddings that were planned, and tried to sell the place quickly. But when he passed away in 1998, Johnsonville was left abandoned. Even today, the town is still looking for its next owner. An auction for the land in 2014 brought Johnsonville back into the spotlight, with hope and wonderment of what it will become.
Everybody wants to know what's going on at Johnsonville. Whoever does purchase Johnsonville will have the opportunity to re-envision Johnsonville and turn it into their dream. I think that's the beauty behind it.
An arms empire that's been reduced to rubble. An opulent summer home now reclaimed by nature. And an entire town where the only thing missing are the people. I'm Nick Apostilides, and this is American Ruins.